The disappearance of American beef from Chinese dinner tables isn't just a story about food, it's a tale woven from the threads of global politics, economic rivalry, and shifting consumer habits. For years, U.S. beef was a symbol of prosperity and modern living for many Chinese families, gracing the tables of those who could afford it. But suddenly, it vanished, leaving a noticeable gap in both supermarkets and family meals. At the heart of this disappearance lies a complex web of politics and money, where every decision ripples across continents and affects millions of lives. It all began with the escalating trade war between the U.S. and China, a conflict that saw both nations imposing new tariffs on each other's goods, from electronics to agricultural products. The tension was palpable, and beef quickly became a high-profile casualty. In April 2025, China struck back with a massive 125% tariff on U.S. beef, adding to an already hefty 22% tax. This move was more than just a financial penalty, it was a clear signal in a high-stakes economic standoff. Practically overnight, American beef became a luxury item, its price soaring far beyond the reach of most Chinese consumers. What was once a growing staple for the middle class became a rare indulgence, if it could be found at all. This wasn't just about economics. The Chinese government's decision was a calculated move, designed to send a strong message to the U.S. about the costs of economic confrontation. For years, China's rapidly expanding middle class had developed a taste for American beef, making China one of the most lucrative export markets for U.S. ranchers. Steakhouses flourished, and American beef became a status symbol in urban China. But the new tariffs changed everything in an instant. Imports plummeted, and shelves that once displayed premium U.S. beef were suddenly empty. Shipments ground to a halt. Supermarkets and restaurants, faced with skyrocketing costs, could no longer afford to stock U.S. beef. Menus were rewritten, and consumers had to look elsewhere for their protein. The Chinese market, once worth $125 million a month to American ranchers, vanished almost overnight. Export facilities sat idle, and the financial impact was immediate and severe. The tariffs acted like a steel wall, blocking a major export route and devastating the U.S. beef industry. Years of relationship building and market growth were undone in a matter of weeks. For American farmers and ranchers, this was more than a setback. It was a catastrophic loss. One of their fastest-growing and most promising markets was now closed, with little hope of reopening soon. The political fight had real, painful consequences for businesses caught in the crossfire. Exporters, restaurant owners, and workers all felt the sting of lost opportunity and shrinking profits. U.S. beef was suddenly priced out of reach for most, and the future of American beef in China ended abruptly, leaving a void in the market and in the lives of those who had come to enjoy it. The trade war had put everything on the table, including what people eat. Chinese families adapted, turning to local meats and alternative proteins while American ranchers searched for new buyers. All because of a political standoff, a once promising market was lost. The story of U.S. beef in China is a powerful reminder of how global politics can change what ends up on our plates, and how quickly fortunes can turn in the world of international trade. The sudden loss of American beef hit Chinese restaurants hard, sending shockwaves through kitchens and dining rooms across the country. For many chefs and owners, it was more than just a supply issue. It was a challenge to their very identity and reputation. This impact was especially pronounced in major cities like Beijing and Shanghai, where diners had grown accustomed to premium American steaks and barbecue. Steakhouses and barbecue joints faced a tough dilemma. Should they raise prices to cover the higher costs, or scramble to find new suppliers to keep their doors open? Most chose to adapt, launching a search for affordable, high-quality beef from other countries. This meant building new relationships and learning about unfamiliar products. Chefs and owners scoured the globe for alternatives that wouldn't compromise on taste or texture. They attended international food expos, sampled cuts from Australia, Argentina, and beyond, and debated which would best satisfy their loyal customers. Menus changed almost overnight. U.S. prime beef was replaced with premium imported beef, and staff had to explain the new offerings to curious diners. The shift was driven by necessity, not choice. Rising costs and supply uncertainty forced restaurants to rethink their entire approach to sourcing ingredients. Chinese consumers, always sensitive to price and quality, were introduced to beef from new sources. Some embraced the change, while others missed the familiar flavors of American beef. The trade war's impact rippled through the entire food supply chain, from ports and warehouses to restaurant tables. Every link in the chain had to adjust to the new reality. It wasn't just beef. Restaurants famous for American-style pork ribs also switched to Canadian pork, experimenting with new recipes to maintain their signature taste. Owners had to rethink their entire supply chain, forging new relationships with global suppliers, and negotiating deals over video calls and at international trade shows. The trade conflict forced a fundamental change in how restaurants operated. Staff needed training on new ingredients, and kitchens had to adjust their workflows to handle unfamiliar products. For many, survival meant embracing a new reality, adapting quickly, staying creative, and finding ways to keep customers coming back despite the changes. The global food scene in China was transformed by politics overnight, leaving restaurants to navigate a world where adaptability became their most important ingredient. As U.S. beef disappeared, Australia quickly filled the gap. With no heavy tariffs and a strong cattle industry, Australian beef became the top choice for Chinese importers. Australian brisket was about 40% cheaper than the American equivalent under the new tariffs. Chefs and customers found the quality excellent, making the switch easy. Supply chains shifted rapidly. Australian beef began flooding Chinese ports. For Australia, this was a windfall. Demand from China surged, boosting their cattle industry. The U.S.-China trade war became Australia's opportunity. This shift showed how global markets respond instantly to political decisions. Chinese consumers still enjoyed their favorite dishes, just with a new source of beef. The trade war created winners and losers, and Australia was ready to win. While Australia gained in beef, carving out a larger share of the global market and strengthening its reputation as a top supplier, Russia seized the moment in poultry, recognizing a unique opportunity to expand its influence in the global food trade. As China distanced itself from Western suppliers due to shifting political and economic priorities, Russia ramped up turkey exports, investing in modern facilities and streamlining logistics to meet China's growing demand for affordable protein. By 2024, Russia had overtaken the U.S. as China's top turkey supplier, shipping 27,000 tons, an achievement that marked a turning point in the global poultry market. Projections showed Russian turkey exports to China would keep growing, fueled by strong bilateral agreements and rising consumer demand. By 2030, exports were expected to reach 60,000 tons, doubling in just a few years and solidifying Russia's role as a key player in Asia's food supply chain. For Russia, this was a strategic move, diversifying China's food sources while also strengthening its own economic resilience and international partnerships. The surge in exports provided a major boost to Russian agriculture, creating jobs and encouraging innovation across rural regions. The Russian poultry industry expanded rapidly to meet Chinese demand. Challenges like bird flu outbreaks and hatching egg shortages pushed Russia to invest in self-sufficiency, building new hatcheries and improving biosecurity measures. The partnership with China encouraged Russia to build a more resilient food industry capable of weathering global shocks and supply disruptions. The poultry trade became a symbol of shifting alliances and new economic realities reflecting the changing landscape of global food security. Russia's agricultural sector was transformed by China's appetite, setting the stage for a new era of cooperation and competition in the world's food markets. The meat trade is about more than price, it's about global politics. China and Russia's growing friendship has made trade easier and more strategic. In May 2025, President Xi Jinping attended Russia's Victory Day parade, a public show of unity. This alliance sent a clear message to the West. Moscow and Beijing stand together. Political solidarity paved the way for trade deals, especially as China sought reliable partners. Every shipment of Russian turkey to China was a step in building this partnership. The West watched with concern, especially amid the war in Ukraine. China's actions, boosting trade and military ties, suggested a deeper alignment with Russia. Food and farming became intertwined with global power struggles. For Russia, trade with China became an economic lifeline after Western sanctions. When Western companies left, China stepped in, filling gaps in everything from cars to energy. Chinese demand for Russian oil, gas, and food kept the Russian economy afloat. The surge in poultry exports to China was a perfect example. Russian farmers expanded production, knowing they had a massive, reliable buyer. This trade created jobs and supported rural economies in Russia. While China has many partners, Russia is now heavily dependent on Chinese demand. This gives China leverage, but for now, both sides benefit. The food trade is a key part of a strategic alliance reshaping global economics. Dinner tables in China and Russia are now linked by politics and necessity. While Russia and Australia thrived, American beef farmers suffered. The loss of China as a market came during a severe drought, with cattle numbers at historic lows. U.S. beef prices were already high, and the trade war made things worse. The Chinese market, once a bright spot, vanished overnight. $125 million a month gone. Farmers had to sell excess beef elsewhere, often at lower prices. Multi-generational ranches faced uncertainty and tough financial choices. The price of U.S. brisket soared, but tariffs made it unsellable in China. Farmers became casualties of a political fight far from their fields. The dream of feeding China's middle class turned into a nightmare. American ranchers were left wondering if the market would ever return. The impact of trade wars is personal for businesses like Home Plate BBQ in Beijing. Famous for American-style barbecue, their main ingredient was U.S. brisket. When tariffs hit, costs soared, threatening the restaurant's survival. The owners quickly switched to Australian beef, cheaper, high quality, and well received by customers. The transition was seamless for diners, but behind the scenes, it was a scramble. This story mirrors thousands of businesses across China adapting to new realities. The shift was driven by economics, not preference. For most customers, the change was invisible. But every meal told a story of global trade, politics, and resilience. Adaptation was the key to survival in a world shaped by international disputes. China's move away from American beef shows how politics can change what's on our plates. A government dispute became a global ripple, hurting U.S. farmers and helping Australian and Russian producers. For consumers, the switch meant new ingredients but stable prices. For Russia, Chinese demand became a lifeline. Trade and politics are now deeply linked. Food is part of a larger geopolitical game. The American farmer, Beijing restaurant owner, and Russian poultry worker are all connected by these shifts. China's decision to ditch U.S. beef reshaped the global food map. The consequences will be felt for years to come.